Dr. Lila Marlowe had dedicated her life to animals, finding fulfillment in the smallest victories at her modest veterinary clinic. Nestled at the edge of town, her clinic was nothing extravagant, just a warm, functional space with a few exam rooms and a small reception area. The walls were lined with posters of smiling pets, and a faint smell of antiseptic mingled with the scent of fresh-baked treats she kept for her patients. It was a humble operation, but one built with care, patience, and compassion. On a brisk November morning, Lila unlocked the front door of her clinic, savoring the quiet before the day's rush. Winter's chill nipped at her cheeks, and she hugged her coat tighter as she stepped inside. Her assistant, Abby, was already at the front desk, reviewing the day's schedule. "Morning," Dr. Marlowe, Abby said cheerfully, though her eyes carried the weariness of someone who hadn't had quite enough coffee. "Morning, Abby," Lila replied, setting down her bag. "How's it looking today?" Abby glanced at the clipboard. "Pretty full, but nothing we can't handle. Oh, and Mrs. Green called again. She insists her cat is allergic to his new food. I think she's just giving him too many treats." Lila chuckled softly. "Well, let's get through the morning first. I'll deal with Mrs. Green later." The first few appointments were routine: a rambunctious Labrador needing vaccines, a grumpy tabby with a skin condition, and a sprightly parakeet who chirped nonstop through his entire exam. Lila loved her work, even the less glamorous parts. Each animal brought its own unique charm, and she found immense joy in earning their trust. Just as Lila was wrapping up with a particularly nervous dachshund, the doorbell chimed softly, signaling another arrival. She glanced toward the reception area and froze. A small boy stood just inside the door, his hands clutching the frayed leash of a wiry, scruffy terrier mix. Behind him, a man and woman entered, their faces lined with worry and weariness. The boy's clothes were clean but worn, and his too-thin jacket seemed barely enough for the biting cold outside. His parents' threadbare coats told the same story: a family struggling to make ends meet. "Hi there," Abby greeted them warmly. "How can we help you today?" The boy stepped forward, his wide brown eyes meeting Abby's nervously. "This is Max," he said softly, glancing down at the dog at his side. "He's been really sick, and we didn't know where else to go." Abby looked toward Lila, who immediately crossed the room to join them. She crouched down to the boy's level, her gaze settling on Max. The terrier's fur was patchy and dull, his ribs visible beneath his thin frame. His breathing was labored, and every few moments he let out a harsh, rattling cough. Lila's practiced eye told her the little dog was in serious trouble. "Hello, Max," Lila said gently, extending her hand for the dog to sniff. Max's tail wagged weakly, a gesture of trust despite his obvious discomfort. The boy's father stepped forward, removing his weathered cap as he spoke. "Ma'am, we don't have much," he said, his voice tinged with both pride and desperation. "But Max's family, we've had him since Ethan was little. We can't lose him." "Ethan." The boy tightened his grip on the leash as though it were a lifeline. His eyes brimmed with unshed tears, and he looked at Lila with a quiet, pleading hope. Lila glanced back at Abby, who gave her a small, knowing nod. Then she stood and smiled at Ethan and his parents. "Let's take a look at Max and see what's going on," she said. As she led the family into the exam room, Lila felt a familiar ache in her chest, the kind that came whenever she saw the intersection of love and hardship. It wasn't the first time she'd met a family struggling to care for their beloved pet. But it never got easier. She knew that in moments like these, her role extended beyond being a veterinarian. Inside the exam room, Lila worked carefully, her hands gentle as she examined Max. The little dog trembled slightly but allowed her to poke and prod, his eyes darting between Ethan and his parents as if seeking reassurance. When Lila pressed her stethoscope to Max's chest, her brow furrowed. His heartbeat was irregular, and his lungs sounded congested, hallmarks of a serious respiratory infection. "Max is a tough little guy," Lila said as she straightened up, trying to keep her tone reassuring. "But he's very sick. I'll need to run some tests to find out exactly what's going on and how best to help him. Ethan's mother, a kind-faced woman with calloused hands, stepped forward hesitantly. How much will it cost, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lila hesitated, glancing between the worried parents and the hopeful boy. She knew the tests, medication, and care Max needed wouldn't come cheap, and this family was clearly already stretched thin. But she couldn't bring herself to name a price that might shatter their fragile hope. After a brief pause, she said, "Let's focus on getting Max better first. We'll figure out the rest later." The relief in the room was palpable. Ethan's eyes widened with gratitude, and his mother clasped her hands to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan stepped forward, his small voice trembling with emotion. "Does this mean you're going to save him?" Lila crouched again, meeting his gaze. "We're going to do everything we can to help Max," she said firmly. For the first time that morning, Ethan smiled, a shy, tentative smile that melted Lila's heart. She knew she was taking a financial risk by agreeing to treat Max without a clear payment plan, but some things were more important than money. As the family left the room to wait while she prepared the tests, Lila felt a deep sense of purpose. Max had a long road ahead, but Lila was determined to give him a fighting chance, for Ethan's sake as much as the dog's. What she didn't know was that her decision that day would set in motion events that would ripple through her life in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The sun dipped lower in the sky as Lila ran the necessary tests on Max. Ethan and his parents sat in the waiting room, their nervous energy filling the space. Abby brought them cups of tea, her own face soft with empathy, as she tried to lighten the mood with small talk. In the exam room, Lila finished her work and reviewed the results. Max had a severe respiratory infection, compounded by an underlying heart condition. Without immediate treatment, his chances weren't good, but with the right medication and care, there was hope. She stepped into the waiting area, bracing herself to explain everything as gently as she could. Ethan sprang to his feet the moment he saw her. His parents followed, their faces etched with concern. Lila knelt to Ethan's level, speaking directly to him. "Max is very sick, but I believe he can get better," she said, choosing her words carefully. "It's going to take medicine and time, and we'll need to work together. But I think he's a fighter, just like you said." Ethan nodded solemnly, gripping his father's hand tightly. "We'll do whatever it takes," his father said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying the weight of his family's struggles. Lila outlined the treatment plan, explaining the medications Max would need and the care he'd require at home. As she spoke, she saw Ethan's mother glance anxiously at her husband. The unspoken worry between them was impossible to miss. "I know this is a lot," Lila added gently, "but we'll make it work. Max is in good hands with you and we'll get him the care he needs." Her words seemed to lift a small burden from their shoulders. Ethan's mother wiped away a tear, and his father extended his hand. "Thank you, Dr. Marlowe. We'll never forget this." Over the following days, Lila threw herself into Max's care. The little dog stayed at the clinic for the first week, too weak to go home. Each morning, Ethan and his parents visited, bringing small offerings as tokens of their gratitude. One day, it was a jar of homemade jam. Another day, a scarf Ethan's mother had knitted. Lila accepted each gift with genuine appreciation, her heart warmed by their thoughtfulness. As Max began to regain his strength, Ethan took on a central role in his care. Under Lila's guidance, he learned how to give Max his medication and how to keep him calm during coughing fits. Lila marveled at the boy's patience and love for his dog, qualities that reminded her of why she had chosen this path in life. By the end of the second week, Max was well enough to return home. Ethan's joy was contagious as he carried Max out of the clinic, bundled in a soft blanket. Lila watched them leave, her heart full as she waved goodbye. Though Max's recovery was far from over, Lila knew the family would see it through. Ethan's parents continued to bring him by for follow-ups, always expressing their gratitude in heartfelt ways. As the weeks turned into months, Max transformed into a healthy, energetic dog, his eyes bright and his tail wagging constantly. One snowy afternoon, months after Max's recovery, Lila received a knock on her clinic door just as she was closing up for the evening. She opened it to find Ethan and his parents standing there, Max wagging his tail at their feet. Ethan held a neatly wrapped package in his hands. "This is for you," he said shyly, handing it over. Lila unwrapped the paper to reveal a hand-drawn portrait of Max, his face beaming with life and joy. The details were stunning, the way his ears perked up, the sparkle in his eyes. "Ethan drew it," his mother said proudly. Lila looked at the boy, her eyes misty. "Ethan, this is beautiful. Thank you so much." "It's the least we could do," Ethan replied. "You saved him." Lila hung the portrait in her clinic that same evening, right above her desk. Every time she glanced at it, she was reminded of the love and resilience that had carried Max through his darkest days. Little did she know, this act of kindness was only the beginning of a story that would come full circle in a way she could never have predicted. Years passed, and the memory of Max and Ethan's family remained a warm spot in Lila's heart. The hand-drawn portrait stayed on the wall of her clinic, often catching the eyes of new visitors. She would tell the story behind it whenever someone asked, always with a smile. Her clinic continued to thrive not in wealth but in purpose. Over time, she became a trusted figure in the community, known not only for her skills but also for her heart. Still, life wasn't always easy. Lila's clinic, though steady, was modest in its earnings. Veterinary medicine wasn't a lucrative field, and she often found herself cutting corners to ensure she could help as many animals as possible. The bills stacked up, the equipment aged, and Lila often worked long hours to keep everything running. Yet she never regretted her choices. She knew she was making a difference. One particularly tough winter brought new challenges. A series of storms left the town battered, and many families were struggling to rebuild. Lila's clinic was no exception. Leaks had sprung in the roof, and the heating system was failing. On one bitterly cold morning, Lila arrived at the clinic to find a puddle of water in the waiting room, where the ceiling had dripped overnight. Abby, ever the optimist, greeted her with a cup of coffee and a hopeful smile. "We'll figure it out," Doc Abby said, handing her a mop. "We always do." Lila laughed softly, appreciating Abby's unwavering support. "Let's hope so," she said, though the weight of the repairs loomed large in her mind. She had applied for a small grant from a local animal welfare organization, but it would take weeks to hear back, and the clinic needed help now. As the day went on, Lila immersed herself in her work, setting her worries aside. The steady rhythm of appointments and the familiar faces of her patients brought her comfort. By the afternoon, she was examining a litter of kittens brought in by a kind-hearted retiree when Abby poked her head into the room. "Dr. Marlowe? There's someone here to see you," she said, her tone curious. Lila glanced up from the kittens. "Do they have an appointment?" "No, but you'll want to come out for this." Intrigued, Lila gently placed the squirming kitten back into its carrier and followed Abby to the reception area. There, standing by the front desk, was a man she didn't immediately recognize. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and a warm, confident smile. Beside him stood a younger man, perhaps in his early 20s, holding a large bouquet of flowers. Something about the younger man seemed familiar, but Lila couldn't quite place him. "Dr. Marlowe," the older man said, stepping forward and extending his hand. "It's been a long time. I'm Robert Klein, and this is my son, Ethan." At the mention of Ethan's name, the years fell away, and Lila's mind raced back to that cold November day when a little boy and his scruffy terrier had walked into her clinic. She stared at the young man before her, now tall and broad-shouldered, with the same warm brown eyes she remembered. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft with astonishment. "I can't believe it. Look at you." Ethan grinned, his cheeks flushing slightly. "It's been a while," he said. "Max's recovery was just the start of everything good that's happened to us." Robert smiled, his voice filled with gratitude. We've been wanting to come back for years, but life has a way of getting busy. Ethan insisted we finally make the trip. Lila glanced at the flowers and then at the two men, her heart swelling. It's wonderful to see you both. How's Max? Ethan's grin widened. Still going strong. He's a little slower these days, but he's happy and healthy. The reunion was filled with warm conversation as Robert and Ethan recounted how Max's recovery had been a turning point for their family. Ethan, inspired by the care and compassion he witnessed at Lila's clinic, had started volunteering at an animal shelter in his teens. That passion had grown into a career. He was now studying veterinary medicine himself, with plans to open a shelter for rescue animals. I wouldn't be here without you, Ethan said earnestly. You showed me what kindness can do. Lila blinked back tears, deeply moved. That means more to me than you know, she said. But I only did what felt right. You and your family did the rest. As the conversation continued, Robert cleared his throat and reached into his pocket. Dr. Marlowe, there's another reason we came today. We heard about the storms and the damage to your clinic. We wanted to help. Lila's eyes widened in surprise as Robert handed her a folded check. We've been fortunate in recent years, he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. And we owe so much of that to you. Please use this to repair the clinic or whatever else you need. Lila hesitated, her hands trembling as she unfolded the check. When she saw the amount, her breath caught. It was far more than she could have imagined, enough to not only fix the roof and heating but also upgrade some of the aging equipment she had been struggling with for years. I can't accept this, she began, but Robert shook his head firmly. You can, he said. And you should. You gave us more than money ever could. Let us give something back. Ethan nodded, his expression earnest. Please, Dr. Marlowe. This is the least we can do. Tears welled in Lila's eyes as she looked at the two men. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This means the world to me and to every animal we care for here. The room was quiet for a moment, filled only with the warmth of shared gratitude. What had begun as a small act of kindness years ago had come full circle, proving that even the simplest gestures could create ripples far beyond what anyone could foresee. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity at the clinic. Lila used the Klein family's generous donation to repair the roof, replace the faulty heating system, and upgrade her outdated medical equipment. For the first time in years, the clinic felt like it was running at its full potential. The waiting room was brighter, the exam rooms were more efficient, and Lila found herself energized in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. As word spread through the community about the renovations, more and more clients began bringing their pets to Lila. Families who had once hesitated due to the clinic's limited resources now came with trust and enthusiasm, knowing their pets would receive top-quality care. Abby, who had been with Lila through thick and thin, marveled at the transformation. This place looks like a whole new clinic, she said one afternoon as they hung a thank you card from a grateful family on the bulletin board. And it's all thanks to that incredible gift from Ethan and his dad. Lila smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It's more than the money, she said thoughtfully. It's the reminder that what we do here matters. That even small acts of kindness can come back in ways we never expect. One cold morning, as she was preparing for a surgery on a rescue cat, Lila heard a familiar voice behind her. Dr. Marlowe, do you have a minute? She turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his cheeks pink from the cold and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He had been stopping by the clinic more frequently in recent weeks, helping out when he could and soaking up every bit of knowledge Lila was willing to share. Of course, Ethan, she said, setting aside her clipboard. What's on your mind? Ethan stepped inside, his expression a mix of nervousness and determination. I wanted to ask if maybe I could do an internship here over the summer, he said quickly. I know you're busy, and you probably don't have time to teach someone like me, but... Lila held up a hand, stopping his rambling. Ethan, I would love to have you here, she said warmly. It would be an honor to help you on your journey to becoming a vet. The relief on Ethan's face was palpable, and he grinned from ear to ear. "Thank you," he said. "I won't let you down." True to his word, Ethan threw himself into the internship with unwavering dedication. He arrived early each morning and stayed late, soaking up every bit of knowledge Lila and Abby shared with him. He learned how to calm anxious animals, assist with basic procedures, and even handle the more challenging aspects of the job, like delivering difficult news to pet owners. One day, as they worked together to treat an injured stray, Lila found herself marveling at how far Ethan had come. His gentle hands and soothing voice reminded her of herself when she was just starting out. "You're a natural," she said as they finished wrapping the stray's paw. Ethan looked up, his expression thoughtful. "I had a good teacher," he said simply. As the summer went on, Ethan's presence became a fixture at the clinic. The clients loved him, especially the children, who often asked him about Max. Ethan never tired of sharing the story of how his dog had been saved and how that experience had shaped his future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the clinic quieted for the day, Ethan approached Lila with a sheepish smile. "I was wondering if you'd like to come to dinner at our house this weekend," he said. "My parents would love to see you again, and Max would too." Lila hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I'd love that," she said. That Saturday, Lila found herself standing in the Klein's cozy kitchen, the smell of homemade lasagna filling the air. Ethan's mother bustled about, setting the table with mismatched plates and cheerful cloth napkins. Robert stood by the stove, stirring a pot of sauce and chatting with Lila about her work. Max trotted around the room, his tail wagging happily as he greeted everyone in turn. When he reached Lila, he rested his head on her lap, looking up at her with the same trusting eyes she remembered from years ago. "You're still the same sweet boy," Lila said, scratching behind his ears. As they sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and memories. Ethan's parents shared stories of how their lives had changed since Max's recovery, and Ethan spoke excitedly about his plans to open a shelter one day. "We couldn't have done any of this without you," Robert said as the meal wound down. "You gave us hope when we needed it most." Lila shook her head, her voice soft. "You gave me just as much in return," she said. "I never expected anything back when I helped Max. But seeing how far you've all come, that's the greatest gift I could ask for." As the evening came to an end, Ethan walked Lila to her car, Max trotting along beside him. The stars sparkled overhead, and the crisp night air carried the promise of good things to come. "Thank you for everything," Ethan said as Lila opened her car door. "Not just for Max, but for believing in me too." Lila smiled, her heart full. "You're going to do amazing things, Ethan," she said, "and I'll always be here if you need me." She drove home that night with a deep sense of peace, knowing that the love and kindness she had given years ago had grown into something far greater than she could have imagined. Months turned into years, and the threads connecting Lila and Ethan's family only grew stronger. Ethan completed his veterinary studies and opened a small rescue shelter on the outskirts of town. True to his word, he dedicated it to helping animals that no one else could, just as Max had once been helped. He named it Max's Haven in honor of the dog who had inspired his journey. The shelter quickly became a beacon of hope for abandoned and neglected animals. Ethan poured his heart into the work, and his parents became regular volunteers, offering their time and care to the animals that came through the doors. Max, now graying and moving a bit slower, still had his youthful spark, and became the unofficial mascot of the shelter. Visitors loved seeing him trot around, his tail wagging and his eyes full of mischief. Lila was a frequent visitor at Max's Haven, often bringing supplies or helping with medical procedures for the animals in Ethan's care. The bond between her and Ethan deepened into a cherished friendship, built on mutual respect and a shared mission. One sunny afternoon, as Lila was preparing to leave the clinic for a visit to the shelter, Abby handed her a small envelope. "This came for you today," Abby said with a smile. Curious, Lila opened it and found a handwritten note from Ethan. Dr. Marlowe, I wanted to invite you to something special. This weekend, we're hosting an adoption event at the shelter, and it wouldn't feel right without you there. We've planned a little surprise too. Hope you can make it. Lila's heart warmed as she read the note. Ethan's passion and drive reminded her of the spark she had felt when she first opened her own clinic. She marked her calendar immediately, eager to see what Ethan had planned. When the weekend arrived, the shelter was alive with activity. Balloons and banners decorated the outdoor space, and families strolled among the pens and kennels, meeting the animals up for adoption. Ethan and his volunteers moved seamlessly between visitors, answering questions and introducing people to their potential new pets. Lila arrived to a warm welcome from Ethan's parents, who were manning a refreshment table piled high with cookies and lemonade. He's been waiting for you, Ethan's mother said with a knowing smile, pointing toward the center of the event. Ethan was standing near a small stage, speaking into a microphone as he addressed the crowd. Thank you all for coming today, he said, his voice steady and full of enthusiasm. This shelter wouldn't be here without the love and support of our community. But there's one person I owe a special thanks to, someone who changed my life and inspired everything you see here. He glanced toward the crowd, his eyes locking on Lila. Dr. Marlowe, would you come up here for a moment? The crowd turned to look at Lila, and she felt her cheeks flush as she made her way to the stage. Ethan extended a hand to help her up, his grin wide and genuine. Everyone, this is Dr. Lila Marlowe, Ethan said, his voice brimming with emotion. Years ago, she saved my dog, Max, when my family couldn't afford to pay. She didn't ask for anything in return. She just saw a family in need and chose to help. Lila looked out at the crowd, her eyes misty as she saw people nodding and smiling. Her kindness changed everything for me, Ethan continued. It showed me what it means to truly care for others, no matter the cost. And because of her, I found my purpose. That's why today we're dedicating Max's Haven to Dr. Marlowe, in recognition of the love and compassion she shared with so many. A cheer erupted from the crowd as Ethan unveiled a new sign above the shelter's entrance. It read Max's Haven in honor of Dr. Lila Marlowe. Lila pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the gesture. She turned to Ethan, tears in her eyes. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Just say you'll keep being you, Ethan said with a smile. The rest of the day was a blur of joy and gratitude. Families adopted dozens of animals, filling the shelter with laughter and happy tears. Lila stayed until the very end, helping Ethan and his team clean up and reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them all to this moment. As she stood outside the shelter that evening, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the fields, Ethan joined her with Max at his side. Thank you for everything, Dr. Marlowe, Ethan said quietly. Lila looked at him, her heart full. Call me Lila, she said, and thank you, Ethan. You've taken what started as a simple act of kindness and turned it into something extraordinary. Max wagged his tail, leaning against Lila's leg as if to say he agreed. In that moment, surrounded by the love and hope that had grown from a single decision years ago, Lila felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Life had come full circle, proving that even the smallest gestures could lead to something truly extraordinary. The stars began to twinkle in the sky as Lila said her goodbyes and headed home, her heart brimming with gratitude. She knew that the ripples of kindness never stopped, they just kept growing, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. And that was more than enough.